Hi friends, it's Ashley and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be another reading vlog, and we are going to be reading a book that I'm really excited for. It's going to be the first 2026 YA fantasy book that I'm going to be reading this year, and it's one of my anticipated ones. It is The Swan's Daughter by Roshani Chokshi, and so I'm really excited for this. It seems like it's going to have fairy tale vibes, which I love books with fairy tale vibes. And in this, our main female character is Veritas Swan, which means her song has the power to make people tell the truth. And then our love interest is a prince, and his parents are holding a competition for his hand in marriage. And this is a problem because of a poorly worded wish to a sea witch. Now, all that anyone needs to rule their kingdom is the heart and hand of the kingdom's heir. And the problem is people take that quite literally. So if he marries the wrong person, then he could end up dead. So that is a major problem. But then our main female character comes along. They end up making a deal, and in exchange for him offering her shelter and protection, she will use her power to sort through his potential brides. That's so cool and whimsical. Alright, I'm only on page 2, but the manor where the story is currently taking place is built atop a pile of clouds. Like, that's so whimsical and neat. I love that. I'm only on page 2, but I have a feeling that I'm going to love this author's writing style, because just listen to how she describes this manor in the clouds. If one were to look at Hush Manor from a distance, one might remark that it looked as though the manor had been built atop a pile of clouds. Perhaps that person would shake their head in disbelief, convinced this was mere folly and a trick of the weather. But as it so happened, Hush Manor was built upon clouds. Long ago, a handful of lazy cirrus and cumulus could not be bothered to stay in the sky, and so they had dropped like apples into the Silent Lakes district. Like, that description, I just love it. Again, it's just so whimsical and fantastical feeling. This is very interesting. It says, but the death of once beloved was the death of a Veritas Swan. Hi, so I am back with a reading update because I have made it to chapter 13, page 115. And so far, I am really enjoying this. I'm just loving so far the whimsical and fairy tale vibes of this book. So the book starts off by telling us the story of the main female character, Damsella, her mother and father, and how they met. So her mother, Araminta, is a Veritas Swan, and Veritas Swans live in a different realm that humans shouldn't be able to access. But her father, Prava, is a wizard, and so he ends up finding a way to get to the realm, and he goes there with the intent and purpose of wooing one of the Veritas Swans, and he ends up meeting Araminta. And Araminta's mother always told Araminta to stay away from humans, that it's not worth falling in love with them. But Araminta, of course, does not listen to her mother, and so she ends up meeting Prava, and they end up having secret meetings, and she falls in love with him. But the thing is, when a Veritas Swan falls in love, it's dangerous for the Veritas Swan, because the person that they fall in love with then has control over them. And also, if the person they fall in love with dies, then the Veritas Swan will die as well. And so when she declares her love to Prava, he ends up gaining the power to control her and control when she's in her swan form and her human form. And so we come to learn that Prava is not a nice person at all, that he's kind of a monster, but we also learn that he does truly love Damsella's mother, but his love is kind of twisted. And so he has this plan where he is going to use his and Araminta's children to unlock the secret of immortality, because that's what he's been trying to figure out his entire life. And so they end up having 7 daughters, but the 7th daughter, who is our main female character, Damsella, is slightly different from all the rest of her sisters. So she does not have wings like the rest of her sisters do, and she can sing, and her song can tell the truth, but her singing is awful and does not sound pretty like a Veritas' song is supposed to. And so the years go by, and one by one, Demelza's sisters sisters are sent off to do their father's bidding until it's only her left. And the beginning of this book feels like a mixture of like The Ugly Duckling and Cinderella, because Damsella, in addition to not having wings and not having a beautiful song, she is taught different things than her sisters, and she's also treated differently by her mother. And one example of this is when her sisters took lessons on court etiquette, her mother insisted that Damsella studied the butchering of beasts. And when her sisters learned to dance, Damsella was taught to run without tiring. And then when her sisters practiced cosmetics and beauty, Damsella found that all the mirrors had been enchanted to blur her reflection. And in addition to that, her sisters get to wear pretty dresses, and she kind of just gets to wear rags. And then one other difference between Damsella and her sisters is that her sisters, when they are born, because they were born between a human and a Veritas swan, their father automatically gets like control over their swan forms. Whereas with Damsella, he's not able to do that. So in that way, we as readers can see that gives her freedom, but also like kind of to her, she doesn't understand that yet, so it doesn't really feel like freedom to her. And instead, she just wants to do what she can to impress her father and gain his favor. And then another element of this book that is really adding to the fairy tale vibes and whimsical feeling of the book that I'm loving so far is the world building. So the manor where Damsella and her sisters grow up and where her mother and father lives is first is located in the clouds, and then second, it's also like sentient and alive, and it really feels like its own character in this book. For example, in chapter 4, page 25, the story says, "For the first time, the manor did not shuffle through the moors, but swayed, for it noticed that a certain movement lulled the girls to sleep. It tried to shush them the way Araminta did, but its stones made an awful groaning sound, and so it quickly abandoned all thoughts of lullabies." And so I just love how the manor is described and how it just pretty much feels like its own character. And I'm also just loving the writing style of this book as well. And you can see from like the passage I just read, just like how whimsical and fantastical the writing feels. And then in addition to where Damsella lives, the king's castle where our main male character, Prince Eris, resides is also alive as well, and you get examples of that further into the book. And in chapter 7, which is titled Wrath Castle Cannot Contain Its Excitement, you get to read a little bit from like the point of the view of the castle. And it's just so delightful. And speaking of chapter titles, I love the names of the chapter titles in this book so much. They're all so fun and very whimsical. One of my favorite chapter titles so far has been chapter 5, which is The Wizard Considers Raising Chickens. Like, that just made me chuckle. And then the next chapter I'm going to be reading, chapter 13, is called A Bear and a Bargain. And that title is so intriguing. And then going back to the world building, we've also learned so far that there's so many different types of races and types of people that also just adds to like the fantastical elements of this book. There are sirens, there are people from the mountains that are more ice than flesh, there are people with tails, there's a character in here that has pink hair, and so I'm finding all of that very interesting and fascinating to read about. And then in addition to that, in this book it's been mentioned how people have two lives. So the first life you live is as a human, and then once your first life ends, for your second life you come back as a part of nature, so like as a tree or a rock or a plant. And there's talk of here about a woman who died and she became a cherry tree, and her cherry tree now grows dresses. And so for the first 8 chapters of the book, we're following Damsella, but then in chapter 8, we switch over to Prince Eris and we finally get to meet him. And I'm really liking his character so far. He's very much like a dreamer, and he just really wants to find true love. And then he has a twin sister, and his twin sister is like the total opposite of him. She's always dressed in all black, she's very serious, and she does not want him to be killed. And so I feel like so far she's my favorite side character. And similar to how we got Damsella's mother and father's love story, we also get Prince Eris's mother and father's first love story, and theirs also feels very fairy tale like, but theirs feels more lighthearted and has a little bit more humor to it, whereas Damsella's parents, where at first it seems very innocent and wonderful, it has like darker undertones to it. And so I really like how their parents' stories contrast each other. And so the point where I'm at in the story, Damsella has fled her home for certain reasons, and she has made it to Prince Eris's castle, and she has just met with him and has convinced him to let her stay there in exchange for her using her powers to help him sort through his brides. And so I'm really excited to read more of this and see what happens next, and to see Demzelda and Prince Aerys interact, and just to see like more of the world and to see how the competition unfolds. So I finished The Swan's Daughter, so I'm here with final thoughts, and I actually read this all in one day. So this book is very bingeable, and this is the first time in a while that I've read an entire book in a day. And it's been about 4 days since I finished this, and I'm giving this 4 stars. When I first started this, and like in the first half, it felt like it could have been a 5-star read, that it was kind of on its way to a 5-star read, but it didn't quite make it there. But regardless, I still overall very much enjoyed this book, and there were some things about it that I did love. So in particular, I love the world building, the writing style, and just like the overall whimsical and fairy tale like vibes of the book. And I also love like the whole concept of the Veritas Swan and how it feels so whimsical, yet also they're tragic at the same time. And similarly, I also loved all the character building that went in here as well. And so while our 2 main characters are Demzelda and Aerys, we also get to like know their families, and we get to know like the backgrounds and stories of their parents, which then also gives us a better understanding of Aerys and Demzelda's natures and how they came to be where they are in life. Similarly, I like how the book also took time to develop minor characters, such as the contestants that are competing for Aerys' hand in the tournament. And speaking of characters, our 2 main characters, Demzelda and Aerys, I thought they were very well developed. I really liked both of their characters, and I especially liked Aerys and how he's kind of quirky and how he kind of just like went with the flow most of the time, whereas Demzelda was like more on the serious side and a little more on the brooding side. I found their relationship and ultimately their romance just be very cute, but it wasn't like my most favorite romance ever, and I feel like it didn't quite reach like the 5-star level for me in that aspect of the book. And then one other thing that kind of kept this book from being 5 stars for me is towards the end there were these 2 chapters near the end that it felt like they were rehashing something that was just solved in like the previous chapter, and so I didn't really feel like those chapters were kind of needed, or that we need to like go down that path. And I know this is a YA fantasy, but I kind of felt like those 2 chapters were like hitting me over the head with a certain topic. And also just reading those 2 chapters gave me so much anxiety and stress, because I was like, what is going on? What are we doing? Are we like rewriting everything that just happens? And so I wasn't a big fan of those 2 chapters. And those 2 chapters did get kind of dark, and that's the thing about this book. Even though it does have like whimsical, fantastical elements to it, it also has like dark undertones as well. So it's a whimsical fantasy, but it's not a warm-hearted fantasy. And personally, my favorite type of YA fantasy is more on the warm-hearted side. But that is just my personal preference, and overall, I did really enjoy this, and I would recommend it. And I would say if you liked either 6 Crimson Cranes or The Rose Bargain, you should check out The Swan's Daughter, because that book reminded me of like these 2 put together. And this is a standalone, so everything does wrap up in the end. So those are all my thoughts on The Swan's Daughter. Let me know down below if you read this, what you thought of it. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye!